So I put on a keffiyeh and a BDS badge, and for several years I played as an anti-Israel activist. And I built...
Did you assume a different name? Or?
John. It was really 2016-17 that my identity got, outed.
Yeah, how were you outed?
Ramallah was a kicking city. It was a great place to be. I loved going there. We've grown up here, what desperation. What was it that took them thousands of miles away to some foreign land to go and walk into a pub and kill innocent civilians? I viewed the Oslo was a mistake. It wasn't.
In what way?
Bringing Arafat over was a mistake. Firstly, since October the 7th, the BBC have been probably the biggest spreader of anti-Semitism in the United Kingdom, without a shadow of a doubt. I don't think nobody should pay anything to the BBC. It's a cesspit.
Welcome to UDecide, the podcast where we explore diverse views on today's most pressing issues, which don't get the mainstream media attention. In this episode, we're joined by David Collier, a renowned Jewish investigative journalist known for his meticulous research and uncompromising stance against anti-Semitism and all kinds of racism. We'll dive into his life, his work, and his thoughts on contemporary challenges against extremism and the broader implication of his investigations. Whether you agree or disagree with David, I welcome to hear your views and get engaged in a discussion, because I am a supporter of free speech. So, a very welcome to the show, David. It really is a pleasure to see you.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
No, you're most welcome. And let me just say to the viewers, let me just do a little bit of introduction, how I got to know you, because most of you have seen my arrest video. And one of the people that really publicised my case was actually David, who posted the video and said that, look at, this is how the police get the good guy instead of like going after the bad guy. And his tweet went, or his post on X went viral and got a lot of publicity. And I'm really grateful to you for that, David. And also recently I did a video based on one of your investigations about the Sky News, how they sort of like didn't tell the whole truth about that Palestinian family that were involved with terror, and only sort of like tried to ramp up as much sympathy for the without telling the whole story. And that video has had more than 96,000 views, so that's been very well received. So, but I'll let you talk about yourself. You were born in England,
yes,
and then you went to Israel. So,
I was born in England, right, and I brought up here, Ilford, East London boy, middle child, bit of a troublemaker. My mum,
as most people were in Ilford.
My mum decided she wanted to get rid of me, sent me on a one-way ticket, said, right, go spend some time on a kibbutz. So,
how old were you then?
20. Something like that. So I went over there and I stayed 19 years.
Nice. How long did you do on the kibbutz?
First kibbutz about 6 months, but I spent actually 2 or 3 years just travelling around Israel doing kibbutzim and moshavim. That's how I got to know Israel. But in the end, I knew I wasn't going to come back. At least, I just fell in love with it over there. So yeah.
One thing about kibbutzes, I don't know if my subscribers all know about what kibbutzes are, but it's sort of like a collective farm, isn't it? Where it's the most successful form of socialism that's been practiced. Would you not say?
Well, it was. I don't know if it still holds now.
But to start with, to the origin of it.
Absolutely.
And I think the reason for that is because everything was voluntary. So no one forced you to go into the kibbutz. No one forced you to stay in the kibbutz. So when you were there, you were voluntarily sort of sharing everything. You dined together. If you had a carpool.
I also think because they're relatively small, so it's still a community. It's not like with the communist things where you get lost in and there people knew each other. They all had neighbours. It was all friendly, and it was quite small and contained.
Yeah. And even though this is the only successful practical example of socialism that I know, the left are so against Israel, aren't they?
Well,
instead of learning from this, or having sympathy for the kibbutzes and the socialist ideals that's created Israel. Actually, they just seem to be so intent on demonizing Israel. Why do you think that is?
I think it's a complicated question. I mean, the bottom line now is that between the hard left, like the Marxist groups, and the rising Islamic community, the Islamist communities we've got here, there is a growing demographic, a growing number of people who are hostile ideologically to Jews and Israel and Zionism anyway. I think that's driving most of what we see going on.
But going back to the time you were in Israel, so you left the kibbutz, and then what did you do? You had your own business?
I did, yeah. I was running a tourist business. It's how I got basically involved in arguing Israel's case, because I was doing a lot of online work. It was the start of the internet, so it was like before Facebook and all of this, and it was all chat rooms and these forums. So I was advertising my own business. It was a tourist business. I'd go online. I'd look people asking questions about coming to Israel. I'd answer the questions and I'd drive them to my own shop or business, this, that, and the other. So when the second Intifada broke out in 2000, it was like overnight the entire atmosphere of the internet changed. Today we'd recognise it all. It's all the anti-Zionists, the trolls, the bots, all of it. Overnight, thousands of these accounts suddenly appeared. I didn't realise it back then, but I was watching the birth of the internet troll.
Were you taking tourists to the Palestinian areas as well? Or?
No, I was. I was. I mean, it was the Oslo years. I spent more time in places like Ramallah than I did in Tel Aviv. I met, Faisal Hosseini and
who's that?
He was like part of the PA's Oslo. He was based in Jerusalem in Orient House. Hanan Ashrawi, she's another girl.
I
met her.
Yeah.
I met her. So I was doing a lot of work over there.
She comes across as a reasonable person, no?
Well, she's first Palestinian Christian.
Yeah.
So slight difference, but so
very
she's
modern
a bit
and secular.
was very good for Cameron. She was very good because she comes across as modern and secular, but she still drove Yasser Arafat's arguments. So she did well on CNN and things like this. But
still, you rather deal with her than with Hamas, wouldn't you?
I don't know actually, because I'd rather know what I'm dealing with. So if I'm going to fight some kind of radical Islamic group, I'd rather they tell me this is what they do. It's this duplicity. It's when they say one thing in English and another thing in Arabic. That's the people I'd rather not deal with. Yeah.
There was some terrible experiences as well. Talk about your friend Dominic, if you want to.
Yeah,
what happened? Because that's got a British angle. That's the reason.
Yeah, the second Intifada. I was there for the first Intifada, right? So that was some kind of an experience that you go through, and the second Intifada was a shock because it really brought everything home. The buses were exploding in the streets. Israelis were scared to go out. You go to coffee shops. The number of times I was in Tel Aviv and you'd hear an explosion, and then about 30 seconds later you'd start hearing the sirens, and it wasn't you just 20 minutes of just sirens coming, and you knew there'd been a big blast. There was a couple of pubs down on the seafront. My shop was on Ben Yehuda Street, which is just maybe 100 metres from the seafront.
I know it actually. My hotel was on the road parallel to that in Tel Aviv.
Right. Yeah. So on the actual beachfront, there were two pubs next to each other, tourist pubs. One was called the Buzz Stop, and the other was Mike's Place, which was a live music venue. And there was a girl who was working there. Her name was Dominique. I'd known her for years. I knew her before she started working in the pubs as a waitress. And she'd just come back from France. I'd sold her the ticket because I was selling like flight tickets. I'd sold her the ticket. She came to my shop that day with these cakes that she had. And she was going to open up some kind of bakery and do this. And that night, two terrorists hit Mike's Place where she was working. She survived the initial blast, but she never survived the operating table in the hospital. And those two terrorists.
Well, what happened with the operating table?
Well, no, I mean they tried to save her. But she was too badly hurt. They tried to put her back together again, but couldn't. She died on the operating table in the hospital. But the two terrorists were British. One from London and the other, I understand, from Derby.
Yeah.
And that really, looking back on it now, it just shows you what was taking place in the UK at the time.
Yeah, I've talked to, Sol Zatka?
Yes.
The author of the British Suicide.
Yes. Which
the book goes on. I've done a podcast with him as well. And he talks about all the complicity of the British authorities with the Islamists. And if I remember correctly, One of them actually travelled with a British passport to Gaza, and he was actually trained by Hamas, was he? Or
I don't think it was. I think they were. I think it was in. They travelled to Syria first. They went through Syria. They came over through Jordan, through the Allenby Bridge. They both went to Gaza. They were with the ISM for a day or two. We don't know exactly who gave them the orders and so on and so forth. We've seen the videos. They produced one of those videos that they do, before. We don't actually know where the radicalisation took place, where they were given the weapons and so on and so forth. But yes, they were definitely both in Gaza.
I probably think the radicalisation took place in England.
Yeah,
but I mean, to do that sort of attack, I mean, you need some sort of training, don't you? I mean, it's not something that an ordinary person could do.
For sure. A, training. B, they must have had an address. They must. I mean, it's not like they carried the explosives with them.
Right.
I mean, the whole thing was prepared over there and probably in Gaza, and they had the connections for sure.
So when did you find out that your friend was actually involved in the blast?
2:00. Well, I got the phone call because it's my local pub. I mean, this was this was my haunts. So I got a call, I think about 2:00 in the morning, to say Mike's place had just been hit. So it just happened. I then got a phone call about 15 minutes later to say Dominique's hurt, but she's okay. Mm-hmm. And it was only really the following morning that I found out that she was one of the 3 people that were killed.
Mm. One of them was the doorman, wasn't it?
Well, he saved a lot of people.
Exactly, I was going to say, yeah.
Because
of his courage. So many people were saved.
Well, yeah, he obviously saw something suspicious and he stopped them because there's like most places in Israel, especially there's outside seating and inside seating, and he stopped them getting inside. And of course, if they'd have detonated inside, it would have been far deadlier.
So when you went back to Israel, this was your first-hand personal experience of losing someone, was it, or?
In that kind of a close connection. I mean, I've had a couple of others. There was a kid of a child of people I used to teach him English. He died. He was killed. I mean, there were 1 or 2 like that. But this was the first one where I'd known her for years. She was a close friend. It was my home turf.
Right.
Yeah.
So how did that affect you?
Well, look, it's still with me. It changed. It does. These experiences change you because. I mean, firstly, the fact that they're British makes a real big difference because you go on, you hear the other side, oh, well, they're desperate. What choice did they? I mean, these guys were Brits. They were grown up here, What desperation? What was it that took them thousands of miles away to some foreign land to go and walk into a pub and kill innocent civilians? So that side of thing really got to me, and it's part of the reason I'm still fighting now.
Just remind me, what year was that?
2003.
So it was after 9/11.
Yes.
I mean, for sure, I think the radicalisation took place in Britain.
Yes. Pretty much. I mean, they went to do what they did, so for sure.
Yeah. And then, so, I mean, did you have to change your lifestyle at all? Did you think about it? Did you think about leaving Israel, or?
No, I never thought about leaving Israel because of the troubles, because I always said, look, if they're going to get me, at least there I know why they're trying to get me. I'd rather, die as a Jew in Israel having been targeted by a Hamas terrorist than just be caught up as some random,
knife attack or something.
Over here.
Yeah.
So... no, that side of things, no.
Okay. Moving on to something else now. You want to talk a little bit about the Jericho Casino? Because
well,
I've been to Israel twice, but I never realised that you can't have casinos in Israel.
Yeah, gambling's illegal in Israel. So what it was during the Oslo.
I mean, it's strange because I know there's all sorts of religious and zealot people on all sides in Israel, but the state is secular, isn't it? So
it is secular. I mean,
so why is it that? I mean, I've eaten pork in Israel, for example.
You say that, but if you'd have gone in the 1980s, you wouldn't have been able to.
To eat pork?
Yeah.
Right.
It was really only we had massive Russian immigration in 1990 after the fall of the wall and that. They had about 1 million Russians come, and it was really for their diets that they started bringing in pork.
Right.
There were lots of, it's like during Passover week, you wouldn't have been able to buy bread in a Jewish Israeli town. You'd have to go to an Arab town to do it. So it is secular, but there's a lot of restrictions on travel on Saturday, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, you say that.
Yeah, I remember in the hotel that I was on Saturday, there was only one lift that was working.
Yeah.
So
they have what they call the Shabbat lift, which
Shabbat
stops
lift,
at every single floor.
Yeah.
And if you're on the 15th floor, it can take a long time to get back to your room.
And finding a taxi on Shabbat, oh my God, that was so difficult.
It's a lot better than it was now. But it's been a gradual relaxation on that. But yes.
But going back to the casinos. So casinos are still illegal.
Well, I was what I was doing is I was publishing a newspaper every month to support like my tourist business, and I didn't like the Jerusalem Post as publishing house, so I ended up publishing at the Al-Ayam publishing house in Ramallah. So I spent quite a lot of time, in the Palestinian areas, and we were trying to build bridges because it was the Oslo years. So I was doing a lot of talk, trying to find businesses to support, to advertise in the newspaper. Now they were going to open this casino in Jericho, and they had money, but they couldn't. They had problems that nobody would advertise for.
Who was trying to open it?
The Palestinians. A Palestinian businessman had decided, obviously, and quite clever, that if he opened like in Jericho, a lot of Israelis had come,
right?
Because there were no casinos in Israel. So we went over. We tried to do business with them. I said, well, look, you can't advertise in the Israeli newspaper because the Israeli newspaper's worried about losing its religious clientele. I'll advertise. So I'm quite happy to do it. So it was the best deal I had. It was really, you can imagine it's a casino. They've got limited advertising opportunities. So I struck a really, really nice deal. And it was the last edition before the outbreak of the second Intifada.
Right.
So I was so happy. I thought, right, this has guaranteed my newspaper for the next year or two. Never got to publish it, because before we got that thing published, the second Intifada broke out and that casino was bombed.
Right.
And that was the end of that.
By who?
The Israelis.
But Israeli zealots,
targeted by, as part of the, I would imagine there were weapons or something going on there, but the IAF, I think, the Israeli Air Force took it out, from what I remember.
So not because it was a casino, because they thought
I don't think they ever opened. I don't think it was all so quick. It was because the difference, and this is another thing that really, really is important to understand. I'd watched the growth of the Palestinian street during the Oslo years. I mean, Ramallah was a kicking city. It was a great place to be. I loved going there. And you could see the young Palestinians, you could see you wouldn't know you were in the PA areas. They were westernized. It was, there was no oppression on the streets. No, they chose to throw that away. That was a choice. They didn't have to. The outbreak of the second Intifada, the outbreak of violence because they didn't want to sign a peace deal, threw every single thing they had gained in the bin. And where we are today is a result of that.
So what sparked that?
Well, what sparked it is what they say sparked it. And remember, they always have their excuses for why they start the violence. They say it was because Ariel Sharon at the time walked upon Temple Mount, which they obviously see as their own religious site. So they said this is a provocation, and they started violence, which is how it broke out. What really happened was there'd been talks for Oslo for the final settlements. Arafat didn't want to sign on the bottom line. He didn't want to sign the deal, so he needed an excuse. So violence, as usual, was their choice.
But all these years that you were going to places like Ramallah and all that, so you must have had Palestinian friends.
I still have Palestinian friends.
You still have.
Yeah.
So when the Intifada started, did things change? Were they scared of sort of continuing their friendship with you? Or?
Yeah, we had. I mean, they were split up into two separate groups. There were the ones that had Israeli identity, because especially East Jerusalem Palestinians could still have Israeli identity, and there's the ones that don't. So because I had a British passport, I was still capable of going in. I was told not to by everybody, but we still went in a few times, and they could still come to us as long as they had Israeli citizenship. But yeah, I stayed in contact with them. I carried on printing at the LA publishing house, and I just watched the whole atmosphere change around us. It's, you know, suddenly these people were, you know, on the other side of a big wall.
It must have been quite depressing for you. So, you know, this was a period of hope for you. You were making friends with them. You were doing business with them.
I'm not.
And then...
Yes and no. I mean, I viewed the Oslo was a mistake. It wasn't.
In what way?
Bringing Arafat over was a mistake. It was... the first Intifada had almost ostracised the PLO. It pushed them to one side. The first Intifada was not directed. It was spontaneous. The second one wasn't. The first Intifada was spontaneous. And the Oslo process was fundamentally flawed in that they decided to leave all of the problems, the unsolvable problems, to the end. They said, let's not talk about refugees. Let's not talk about the right of return. Let's not talk about Jerusalem. Let's agree on the things that we can agree on, and we'll deal with all of those things later. But that doesn't work. It doesn't work if the other side are not going to move on Jerusalem and they're not going to move on the right of return. All you're doing is delaying the inevitable breakup, which was the problem with Oslo. That was the flaw of Oslo. So whilst it was shocking, everything going on, the second Intifada was shocking, all of the things that were... it was an inevitable situation, and I was aware it was going to happen.
And in 2006, you decided to come back to England. Right. What happened?
Well, I mean, my business was tourism, right? So I built it pretty much over the Oslo years. Then the outbreak of the second Intifada did major damage to Israeli tourism. So but after that, I was trying to rebuild my business around that. Then, of course, 9/11 happens, and that's global tourism gets hit. So I was rebuilding that. I had to live through the whole 3 or 4 or 5 years of the second Intifada, just getting back to the point where I can think, okay, you know, maybe it's okay. And the Lebanon war breaks out, the 2006 war, which,
the 33-day war.
It killed tourism completely. So we were in a position where I said, I'm not rebuilding this again. I was tired of it. So I said, I'd had 2 kids now. I've got 2 very, very young kids. I've got to start looking at that. I said, you know what, let's go back to the UK just for a few years. Try and rebuild there, and then we'll come back again. So I came back just after the Lebanon war because I needed to start again, pretty much.
England changed a lot in the time that you were away?
This is it. You see, this is how I'm doing what I'm doing now. When I left in 87, if somebody took a year out or gap year at university or something like that, they'd go and do some time on a kibbutz or a moshab or something like that. When I came back in 2006, it was a completely different United Kingdom.
In what way?
Firstly, if somebody was taking a gap year, they were more likely to go and spend some time with the International Solidarity Movement or B'Tselem or something like that, looking at how bad Israel was, rather than going and spending any time on the kibbutz. When I left, for example, in 1987, my mum was living in Ilford, and it was a relatively Jewish area.
It's not anymore.
Not really, but you see, most people who live in the United Kingdom didn't see it happen overnight. I did,
right.
Because I've got the 1987 picture and I got the 2006 picture. I've got it before and after.
You never came back during that time?
Not really. I mean, I did for a quick visit, but you don't notice it.
But not long stays.
You don't notice it. You know, I didn't notice that the 6 doors down from my mum had gone from a Christian Science church into a mosque. You know, these kind of things. Suddenly, I was looking at the situation of how everything had changed. I went back to university as a mature student, and I saw what was taking place on campus.
Which university were you?
Birkbeck, because it's a mature student. Mature students.
What were you studying?
But in management studies in the beginning, and then ethics when I went back, master's ethics, and then law as a master's level as well. So I was watching all of these things taking place on campus. Whereas the Intifada had broken out and I'd started arguing with these people online, right? I'd started, arguing with them in the forums and chat rooms, and I was destroyed. I didn't know what I was talking about because I just had basic, what is effectively myths, basic empty government propaganda. And the people I was arguing with pretty much knew their stuff. So the type of person I am, I started saying, well, am I wrong? Are they right? Am I wrong here? So if somebody told me to go and read something, I went and read it. Right? So if somebody said you're wrong, and through this, I began to understand the anti-Zionist position, what their arguments were. When I went to university and I saw it firsthand, I thought, you know what, I want to understand what's driving them. So I put on a keffiyeh and a BDS badge, and for several years I played as an anti-Israel activist. And I built...
Did you assume a different name? Or?
John.
So they thought you were an English pro-Palestinian?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
English, yeah. My name was John O'Dwyer.
Right.
So I had Irish heritage, because that always works. If you're going to hate Israel, it's nice to have a little bit of Irish heritage in there.
Yeah,
So yeah, I called myself John O'Dwyer, created online accounts, and for several years I basically infiltrated the anti-Zionist movement, got into their secret Facebook groups and all of this, and yeah, that's how I got into doing what I'm doing.
So how many years did you spend doing that?
Well,
undercover?
From look, it was a cold start. So I don't want to. I mean, from the time I started, when it was just like almost like a hobby, right, to the time when I stopped, when I was doing it full time, was 7 years.
So you were never trained as a journalist as such. It's something that you sort of like picked it up.
Yeah.
Because of
what
you wanted to do to find out about.
It started as a, like just I want to understand what's driving them, and then I began to realise that we have problems. I began to realise I was looking at this Red-Green Alliance thing that was taking place. The way that these Islamist extremists and the hard left, the way they were communicating, how they were communicating, joining hands, all of these things that were taking place started to worry me. And I said, we have a real problem here, and it's growing.
And you've got to do something about it.
And I've got to do something about it. So what I started to do in the early years, I used to hand the stories to the press. I just say, look, I'm anonymous, take this, take this. The rise of Corbyn changed that. It was the rise of Jeremy Corbyn. I started having pushback from the media, because I was giving them stuff about Corbyn, and they were saying, we need to know who you are, because this is all coming from secret groups. We can't verify it. So it was really 2016, 17 that my identity got, outed.
Yeah, how were you outed?
The actual person who did it was Jackie Walker.
Who's that?
She's a hard left momentum. She's part of Corbyn's crowd.
Member of the Labour Party? Or?
She was. Yeah. What happened, I started getting people sending me photos. They started triangulating the meetings, because they know I was at meeting A, know I was at meeting B, know I was at meeting C. So they started looking for people that were all three meetings. So it's like, is this you? I get these private messages. Is this you? Is this you? Is this you? At some point, they obviously clocked, because she actually posted on social media and said, if you see this guy going anywhere near your meetings, this is him. That destroyed my ability to...
Did they actually find out your true identity?
Yeah. Offline. Online, I still have them all. Right. Online, I still have brilliant accounts that are in all of these groups and that, but offline, they know who I am.
So how did they find out who you are?
Because just piecing things... Because...
I mean, I understand that they found out there was something dodgy about you because you were in all these meetings and they were sort of like spotting you.
Because
but how did they find out that you're David Collier?
Because I was also blogging. I mean, I was a known blogger. It was a question of, okay, so who is... This is David Collier. We know that he's reporting on all this stuff. Right. So who is he in this meeting? So they worked out, tied it together.
Right, so
it wasn't that difficult. It was always going to happen.
It was about to happen at some point.
At that point, it was going to happen. But I mean, in 2006, late 2016, 2017 was the annual centenary of Balfour. So by late 2016, I was a known friend of the Palestinian cause. Still, I was invited to these special strategy meetings to decide on the strategy for the boycott BDS and all of this. So we're still running quite well until late 2016.
Okay, and then since then you've won some awards. One from the Allgemeine and another one from Camera.
Yeah, I'm not very good at beating my own chest.
Okay, but please do it this way.
No, I'm not.
I'm asking you this.
Yeah, no, I get that, but I don't. For me, I'm just. I know I have a skill set. I know that, but I don't. Yeah, the Allgemeine gave me what they call the J100, which is one of the top 100 people positively influencing Jewish life. This was, I think, about 2017. They invited me to New York for some award, and then I think 2000. Well,
Just explain what camera is, because I think a lot of my subscribers wouldn't know what that is.
okay, camera.
It's like CAMERA, isn't it?
Yeah,
Is it acronym or is it?
No, I think it's
Just
it's a
camera.
medium. It's a media
Yeah,
watchdog
right.
that looks at anti-Israel bias in the media. The one in the UK stems from something called SIFWatch, which was the Guardian used to run a comment is free section where they used to let the most radical nasties, run by with that platform. So there was an organisation called SIFWatch that was created that would look at the Guardian. That was eventually became the UK's version of Camera. But they do a lot of really, really good work looking at anti-Israel bias in the media, holding them to account.
And we're starting the year 2025 with some good news, because as a result of one of your writings, the BBC have made an apology, haven't they? Just explain to our subscribers what that was about.
Well, firstly, since October the 7th, the BBC have been probably the biggest spreader of anti-Semitism in the United Kingdom, without a shadow of a doubt. I don't think nobody should pay anything to the BBC. It's a cesspit, and we can go into that more if you want more detail. But anyway, about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, I saw a post on Facebook from a rabbi complaining about the fact that he'd been on BBC and he felt that he was treated unfairly, right? Which is not new, many Jewish people get called onto the BBC and then get, ambushed. So I watched the video, and there was something interesting, because at the beginning of the video, the anchor turns around and says, "We've just heard from other faithful."
Ben Brown, the anchor.
Yeah. The anchor was Ben Brown. He said, "We've heard from a religious leader, a reverend, and an imam, and this." I thought, oh, hang on a minute. So this isn't just a standalone article or an interview. There were other interviews, and
They actually told the rabbi that they just want to talk to him about Hanukkah.
Yes, well, that's what his complaint was. They only wanted really to talk to him about Hanukkah during the holiday period, and they'd also interviewed an imam and a reverend based on the same invitation. So they could bring them on to talk about their communities during this holiday period. So, but this was perfect for me, because it allowed me to say, well, hang on a minute, I have 3 interviews, and I can compare them.
Right.
I mean, if Ben Brown or the BBC anchor or whoever it was harsh and nasty to all 3 of them,
You'd say it was balanced.
BBC is doing its job.
Yeah.
But it wasn't. When I found them, and it took a while to find them, I had to drag through lots of footage because it's all archived, I looked at them and the difference was beyond belief. Firstly, the first 2 interviews had been polite, nice. They'd introduced both, just before they spoke to the Christian, they said, oh, we have a video, and they showed how bad Israel was. Just before they did it to the imam, they said, oh, we have a video, and they showed how bad Israel was. So absolutely, to balance it out, they should have had something about the hostages or the rocket fire or something like this for the rabbi. Forget the fact that we're actually dealing with 2 Palestinians and 1 Israeli, which is already an imbalance.
Yeah.
Then the questions that they asked the first 2...
And that the priest, the Christian Palestinian, wasn't a sort of like a typical... it was more in the sort of like the minority Christian Palestinians, would you not say?
Firstly,
there are more Christians in Israel.
There are, but this is another thing that you never ever get to hear about. They talk about there were almost no Christian Palestinians left. Right. They've almost all gone, but the BBC will never talk about why, ever. So it's trying to find we need a Palestinian. So you need to not only find a Christian Palestinian to talk to, you need to find a Christian Palestinian that hates Israel. Yeah. Because there were plenty. I mean, as I think I pointed out in my piece, they could have gone to Nazareth and found Christians from Nazareth. There were plenty of them, but they didn't. The photos that accompanied while they were talking, both the first 2, religious, respectful images. When they had the rabbi on, it's tanks. The whole thing was horrific. So I put the 3 together, I wrote a piece and said and the BBC had no way out, because it was so bad, it was so obvious. They turned around and apologised. What we should do with the apology is tell them what to do with it, because it's not worth anything. They apologise because we forced them into a corner.
We have a body in this country called OfCom. Which is supposed to be a watchdog, isn't it? To make sure that there's balanced reporting and there's no misinformation being spread and everything. You've outed so many of these BBC programmes. I mean, Do you follow them up with sending complaints to Ofcom or not? Or are you giving up?
I gave up. I did. Firstly, it started off, but I never did because I knew it was a waste of time. Then I thought, you know what, you're a researcher, David. You have to do your job properly. Prove it. So I did. I sent off 3 separate complaints back in November and December 2023. 3 absolute nailed down errors on the BBC's part. The BBC, because when you complain to the BBC, you have to do it their way. So you have to complain first to the BBC. They just messed me around. Wrote to Ofcom, never heard anything. So
They never replied to you?
I got an automatic reply.
Right.
And look, I've got so much to do. I've only got 2 hands, you know, and 1 keyboard. Yeah. So I can't follow up on absolutely everything. You know, I went down the process. It should have worked. It didn't work, and that's down to Ofcom.
Which is sort of like, that was our experience with Press TV. I mean, during the Green movement, you know, Press TV came out with all sorts of outrageous lies. They were showing a false confession of a journalist who was working for Newsweek at the time, who was arrested in Iran. I mean, it was a false confession. There were like people from Ministry of Intelligence behind the curtains making sure that he's saying exactly what he's told to say, but they were sort of like presenting it as a normal interview, you know. And then I don't know if you remember Neda, the face of the Green Movement protest, the Iranian girl that was shot and it was sort of like caught on camera.
Right.
And then they came up with all sorts of lies about, you know, who'd killed her. They even accused this British doctor of having killed her instead of like, you know, saying and all the complaints that we made to Ofcom, it was just no. I mean, they replied to us, but it just nothing. Like
if you want Ofcom to do something, you have to complain about GB News. Otherwise, they're not interested.
Yeah, with GB News, they're very quick.
No, that's it.
Well, at the end, what happened was that the journalist that I was talking about was working for Newsweek. When he came back to England, when he was finally released, he took a civil case against Press TV. That was what prompted Ofcom to finally take action. And even then, I'll tell you what happened. And I'll tell you what happened with Ofcom. So Ofcom just asked Press TV to say where the editorial is, right? And it's quite okay if they just said Tehran. I mean, you have Al Jazeera, and you know they say that the editorial is Qatar, and it's not a problem. But they just have to declare it, you know. But Press TV never replied to them, so then they fined them £100,000, and then they never paid. So finally, they just took them off the Sky platforms, but you can still watch them on 12 different other platforms. You can watch them on satellite, you can watch them on app, you can watch them on internet. So they didn't even take them off air. It was just basically they were left in a position where they had no option because they wouldn't reply to their letter saying where the editorial was, and they wouldn't pay the fine that was imposed on them for not telling them where the editorial was. So, you know, it wasn't even because of all the contraventions of the Ofcom rules that they went after Press TV. So quite a toothless body, really.
Well, look, it's part of the British institutions, and the British institutions doesn't have the guts to stand up to the Islamists. It's that simple. So, you know, for them, they want to go after the far right. They're very comfortable doing that.
It's an easier target, it seems.
Well, yeah, you say easier. I mean, we have to question about whether it exists in the way they believe it exists, but that for them is comfortable territory, absolutely, and they will not have the guts to stand up for the Islamists for that. And you need to, if you're ever going to, as you did, and you're talking now about the Press TV, if they are going to act, it will be because they're forced to act, not out of choice.
Yeah, or out of what they're supposed to do. Like, exactly.
Well, like the BBC apology. The BBC had no choice but to apologise. The dozens of, just from my own research, the dozens of times I've had them over a barrel and they just ignore it or they give some stupid response.
How did they apologise, by the way? Was it a written statement?
I think it was an email to the rabbi himself.
Oh, right, okay.
It wasn't a public statement.
It wasn't a public statement.
No,
it was just a personal reply to
basically, we're sorry this happened. We've looked over the footage. We shouldn't have, you know, we should have focused more on Hanukkah and a little bit less on politics.
Okay. So just to round up the programme, let's talk about what you're doing, something that you're doing right now. You're working on some historical documents. What's that about?
Well, look, history is my big thing. That's my main interest is history, because the the solutions for this conflict, the solutions for the Israel conflicts based in history, if we all actually looked at the history, if we actually follow the history, if we put it into practice, then the conflict solves itself, because this conflict should never have lasted beyond 1949. If you go back to 1949, the entirety of Gaza and what they call the West Bank was in Arab hands. Why didn't the conflict just end? It should have. That was a natural ending point. So history is really big for me. The growth of the Palestinian movement into what it's become today, which is this global movement capable of putting tens of millions of people on the streets, is fascinating. So what I'm trying to do is analyse the birth and the growth of the Palestinian national identity. That's historically what I'm looking at. I'd love to put it in book form. I've got lots of notes, doing lots of research. But that's, what I'm looking at the moment.
And where is all that going to go? Is that
well, hopefully to book form. Hopefully, my intent is to publish a book that tells people what went wrong, and how the Palestinian national identity, how it's conned everyone into believing something that just simply never really existed. Because it really is fascinating to look at what's going on. These people and say, well, none of this is real. It's just not real. And to see it on this global scale. So, yes, that's where I'm going at the moment.
Okay, well, best of luck. I wish you all the success in your in this endeavour, as in your other endeavours, and please carry on with your good work. And once again, thank you for what you did for me.
Well, no, you don't need to thank me for that. That's this way. I mean, look, I saw that video and it was so obvious. It was outrageous.
Honestly.
Yeah.
And I was very lucky to have that video.
I've got friends that have been arrested. I mean, look, we know you go with they can walk down the road with what they like. You go down with a Hamas or a terrorist group and you'll get arrested. I mean, I've got friends that have been arrested, and the arresting officers, we think they're on the other side.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, thanks for coming on the show again. And I think this episode was good to sort of introduce you to my subscribers. But I hope to have you again, and we talk about more current things, about what's in the news, and anything that needs sort of
always happy to come and have a chat with you.
Thank you. Excellent.
No problem.
Thank you, David.
Cheers.
Thank you very much.